We're excited to have one of the founders of Sunrise here with us today. Because I mentioned earlier that we are so inspired by students, we were excited to have her here today and inspire us again before we leave this summit. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Wow. You all are so cheery for 3 p.m. on the third day of a conference. That's pretty good. Hi, my name is Varshini. It's so good to meet you all. I am one of the co-founders of and currently serving as the executive director for Sunrise Movement. And for those of you who don't know what Sunrise is, we are building a movement of young people to stop the climate crisis and create economic prosperity for all in the process. And we exist at the nexus of building people power and political power to make climate action that is rooted in racial and economic justice a priority in this nation for the first time in our country's history. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Intentional Endowments Network. I'm also really honored to be on the stage with female powerhouses like Catherine Wilkinson and Gina McCarthy, so I feel really proud of that as well. And also tickled to be here too, having done a lot of sustainability work when I was an undergrad at UMass Amherst and running the fossil fuel divestment campaign there. Any UMass people in the house? Oh, I see you. That's all I can see because I'm blinded by the lights, but I'll catch you later. Okay, that's awesome. Yes, UMass, best school in the nation. Cool. So, people have talked a lot over the last few days about the urgency of this issue, but I really don't think that it can be understated, and I want us to leave really grounded in what all of this means. I was born and raised outside of Boston. I live in Boston right now, and February is the month of the year where it is so cold and dark you question whether you will ever be happy again. And while that's not a fun experience or something that I particularly enjoy, it is frightening and absolutely terrifying as someone who grew up winter after winter in Boston to see us hit temperatures of 40 and 50 degrees routinely almost every week in February and in January. We, as a global society, recently surpassed 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that doesn't mean much to me or most of the people that I work and talk to. But it does mean something when we consider the fact that the last time that happened, forests grew in Antarctica. Sea levels were 50 feet higher than they are today. And Homo sapiens, what we consider humankind, didn't walk the earth. And so for tens of thousands of years, we have had a stable climate that has dictated how we grow our food, where we live, how we build our communities. And in just 150 years, humankind has thrown our entire ecosystem out of balance, and we are teetering on the edge of global chaos. And for me and my generation, we really feel like we're at a crossroads of questioning whether the path that we will take as a nation and as a world will be that of life or of death. So many things brought me to where I am here today. A lot of it has to do with my family. I am the child of 2 South Indian immigrants, a place where the climate crisis is not a question of 30 or 40 or 50 years from now, but it is a question of this moment. And some of the most critical experiences in my life were seeing the way that climate fuel floods have destroyed communities where my family was born, where we ancestrally have lived. But education is also a huge part of why I'm here and has played such a huge a part of my life. I remember being 14 years old and in the 9th grade and learning for the first time about the pile of trash that was twice the size of Texas sitting in the Pacific Ocean. And I remember learning that there were disparities between people of color and working people, and that some people didn't have clean air to breathe or clean water to drink. And I remember thinking, what kind of world are we creating where people don't have food and don't have water? I remember arriving at college at UMass Amherst and learning for the first time what a social movement was. And being like, oh my God, wait, I don't have to nag my parents every day to just turn off the light bulbs, or I don't have to be the that person who's going after your friends and getting them to recycle every minute of your life. Like, I can actually band together and we can shift the entire status quo that we exist in, and we can change in systems that right now are pushing us down the path to climate destruction. And so this was a huge part of my life, was discovering this fossil fuel divestment campaign and realizing that growing up in America, when you are brown and you're a woman and you're skinny and you're small, you don't feel that powerful. But what social movements can bring us is the ability to rise up together. And we actually, Craig Altimus, who's, I don't know where you are right now, but there you are. Craig Altimus was one of the first people that gave me my internship when I was like 19 years old, so you have him to thank for me being on here, on this stage today. And that was the path that led me to start Sunrise as well. We had been organizing in the Obama years. We had seen a burgeoning grassroots movement around divestment, around the Keystone XL pipeline on college campuses across the country. We had a global movement, actually. We had seen the first glimpses of federal climate action. And at the same time, we were watching UN climate reports after another come by and realizing that that it was too little, and it was very quickly going to become too late. So we started Sunrise because we were young people who were scared about the climate crisis and angry that there was no political vehicle for us to go, and that generations above us had kicked the can down the road until this was just a full-blown emergency. And I think what we understand collectively, not just as Sunrise, but as everybody here in this room, is that the task before us is immense. And in order for us to survive this crisis together, we need nothing less than a once-in-a-century upheaval of our political, social, educational, and economic institutions. And what the climate crisis demands of each and every one of us is to become heroes and leaders in our own right. And so I kind of want to spend the next few minutes talking about what I believe are the greatest challenges that are facing us in this moment and what we need to surmount together. And I don't just think it's the technical issues. I definitely don't think it's understanding the science better, though I think we could do better to translate what the science is telling us into practice. I want to take a second to talk about what it means to really, truly build political will and the public support that we need. So the biggest challenge, a lot of the reason Sunrise was founded in the summer of 2017, and the moment that we kind of erupted onto the national stage was around the Green New Deal. How many people have heard of the Green New Deal? Okay, all right. Some people like it, yeah, I like it. And the Green New Deal fundamentally is a solution that meets the scope and scale and urgency of the climate crisis without leaving any person behind. That's all it is. Yeah, that's it. Easier said than done. And in the fall of 2018, about 200 Sunrisers, young people, went into the halls of Congress and called on Nancy Pelosi, soon-to-be Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Democratic leadership to step up on the issue of climate after they had regained control of the House of Representatives. And within 48 hours, I remember just walking through the halls lined with these signs that said, "What is your plan?" And seeing the images of that just take off in the media. There were over 5,000 articles written about a Green New Deal within 48 hours of that demonstration. We saw it become the talk of a nation, and for the months after, saw thousands and thousands and thousands of young people banging down our doors to say, how can we be a part of this movement? I want to be a part of this movement. And then when we looked at what our media institutions and what other politicians, not all of them, but many politicians, and what many of our elders were saying at that time, we saw a totally different thing. We saw people telling us every day after that it could not be done, that it couldn't be accomplished a Green New Deal. We heard them tell us that we do not have the power, that our vision of tomorrow is unrealistic. And I don't mean to say that this is going to be easy. I don't mean to say that we might not even be successful. But the truth is that I believe the cynics are going to kill us quicker than the carbon. And so what I need in this room is for every single person to refuse that notion and to rage against the notion that what we need as human society to save the future of our civilization as we know it is impossible. And I need you to burn with that rage that is even more powerful than the wildfires that consumed Australia earlier this year or the entire West Coast every year. Because we have no other choice. And at the same time, we have been here before as a nation, as a people. In World War II, our government and our society perceived an existential threat, and we were able to come together to overcome it. And it was far from a guarantee. The American government was able to work in close partnership with dozens of businesses in the auto and chemical industries to surpass our existing manufacturing capabilities and ultimately win the war, building hundreds of airplanes and tanks and bombs and many other things. I was reading about the Canadian government and how the government had literally created corporations, 24 corporations, actually dozens of even more corporations to aid in the war effort. During the war in the 1940s, there were over 18 million community-created victory gardens, like gardens in people's windows and in their yards, 12 million of which were in cities. And a couple years into the war effort, 1/3 of the vegetables produced by the United States came from community victory gardens. So this time, I'm just asking, why can't we bring that level of innovation and investment in entrepreneurship to stopping the climate crisis and have our education systems be the driving force of that? Why can't we blanket every part of our campuses in sustainable food and source locally? Why not? A decade or so prior to World War II, we had the New Deal. And in the New Deal, which is ultimately the namesake of the Green New Deal, we witnessed the greatest decade of policymaking in American history. Over 60 programs that were created or enhanced. The creation of Social Security, the regulation of banks, the creation of over 10 million jobs. Why couldn't we witness that again? And in the New Deal, we also saw some cautionary tales. We saw things like the Federal Housing Administration that state-sanctioned racist redlining practices that ultimately led to consolidation of wealth in richer white families and away from Black and Latino communities. So there's also cautionary tales about the role of racial and economic justice in how we create our policy. In every single one of these instances, we witnessed an existential threat, and we built the political and the public will with and delivered a commensurate response. And right now, what is more of an existential threat than the climate crisis? Nothing. So I think the converging forces of government, of schools and universities, businesses, and the force and might of millions of organized people, that has to work together. That doesn't mean there won't be conflict or tension or disagreements, but we have to see ourselves as a part of a broader movement to bring about that level of social change again. So that's the first thing, cynicism. The second thing is a fear of conflict. And it's very funny that I'm here talking to you because I was that protest kid in college that caused all the trouble that you all know and love. You know that kid. I was going to bring a picture, but I didn't get a chance to earlier. But, I organized for years. I was negotiating with administrators. I was rallying students on campus. I was getting thousands of people to sign on to petitions. I was holding public demonstrations. And it wasn't just to be a pain in the ass to the university and the administrators, because I felt like it, but it was to show how far our university was from living out our values and to ultimately create the kind of support and to shift the narrative in which we were all existing so that our administrators and our power holders could make the necessary changes and to feel like people had their back and they had the support in doing so. And that's what I see the role of the activists today. I believe the conflict that we had in these moments was helpful and it was productive. And a mentor of mine once told me that tension is simply the space in between where you are and where you want to be. And in the fight to stop the climate crisis, we are far, 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 far away from where we need to be. So I want to ask the people in this room to embrace that kind of tension, to attempt to put away the knee-jerk reaction, to control or tamp down or quieten it or delay the actions of people on your campus or the people that you work with, but to see it as a vital part of how we can all make this happen collectively. And in fact, as something that is complementary, if not supportive, of the many ambitions that you've laid out over the last year and are working to implement. And I'm also sorry to say, bad news, but if I do my job well in the next few years, there will be many more people like me on your college campuses vociferously calling for urgent and bold action. And that's a good thing because our leaders today need a mandate from the people to do something. And in return, I think young people are going to work to learn, to demand what is necessary, to do our part to be fair, as well as being unrelenting. And beneath it all, what seems on the surface as anger or intensity is ultimately love for our planet and its people. So that's number 2. Embrace the conflict. The third is believing an intersectional approach is necessary. And there are a lot of stories about how we actually got to the climate crisis and when we started to understand what the climate crisis was all about and who it was affecting. There's a story about how it began with James Hansen testifying for the first time in front of Congress in 1988, just a few decades ago. There's another story about how the climate crisis began hundreds of years ago at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, when we began using fossil fuels for the first time actively and using it to power our economy and building off of this addiction. I think it goes further back than that. And I think it goes back to the moment when settlers first set foot in America. I think a country whose foundations were built upon the genocide of indigenous people was at its birth divorced from a connection of people to people, regardless of difference. And that when that society commodified the earth and privatized it, it divorced itself from a deep connection to the land. A country whose foundations were built upon slavery of African Americans, at its birth, divorced itself from a connection of people to people that created a hierarchy of human value, as Heather McGhee says, that justifies all of the pain and suffering that you see today because of environmental degradation and climate change. There is no environmental pollution if the Black communities living in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, which are former slave plantations, are valued as much as whites. There is no climate crisis if the 3,000 Puerto Rican lives taken during Hurricane Maria valued as much as lives in the mainland of the United States. There is no climate crisis. There is no environmental pollution if we value people not based on the color of their skin or how much money they have in their pocket or where they live, but by their essential value and worth as human. And so I think we have no future and no solutions to the climate crisis if we don't face the horrors of the past and understand where we went wrong. We have an opportunity for a more compassionate and fair and safe society, but it is upon all of us to include that in our solutions. So I believe that we can avoid these pitfalls. I believe that we can build a better future collectively. We can build an education system where students aren't just consumers or customers, but where we are all treating these lives like we are stewarding them forward and taking responsibility for their futures. And understanding that they are growing up in what might be the end of human history as we know it, or just the beginning. We could create a value system that isn't just about profit seeking, but put our values into practice of what we invest in versus what we don't, like organizations like Divest Ed teach us. We could change our curriculum to teach every student about how to care for each other and prepare for the fight ahead to stop climate change. We could eliminate single-use plastics. We could power our universities 100% on renewables. We could ensure that Black, Brown, and Indigenous students will be a part of every solution and be its beneficiaries. We can build a world where no one is left behind. What else can we do? You all have been talking about this for 3 days. What else can we do? What can that world look like? Anything? Shout them out. That's all I'm asking. Carbon sink buildings. Divestment. Zero waste. Green revolving funds. Sustainable food systems. Car-free campuses. Free public transportation. Clean air. Yes, these are awesome. These are great ideas. We have no dearth of great ideas. We just need the will and the rage and the fierce love to make sure that all of that is possible. Okay, so now I want to take you through a little bit of an awkward exercise. And it might feel a little cheesy, but I would love for everybody to just close your eyes. Or if that's not comfortable for you, just lower your gaze a little bit and look down. And I want you to bring to mind the person that you love in this world more than anything. The person that you live for, who you might even die for. I want you to see their face in your mind and imagine what it feels like to be with them. I'm bringing to mind my fiance, who I miss very much in Boston. And I want you to think for a second, what wouldn't you do to protect that person? To protect the world that they live in so they can survive and thrive. Now I want you to imagine someone that you work with, or perhaps some students on your campus. Somebody that you had a good conversation with here today. People you might not really know, but who you see every single day, like your neighbor or that awkward colleague. Someone loves them too. Someone can't help but smile when they bring that person to their mind. Someone lives for that person. Someone would die for that person. What wouldn't you do to protect the people around you and the world they live in so they can survive and thrive? Okay, open your eyes. Thank you for doing that with me. This is our moment, y'all. And what a Green New Deal could mean would mean stopping the climate crisis. It would mean millions and millions of people and the places we love are spared from the worst of storms. With good, clean jobs, tens of millions of people are lifted out of poverty. We put an end to environmental racism, and millions more Black and brown kids and poor kids breathe clean air and drink clean water and live happier and healthier lives. Our country finally stands for dignity and justice for all. So that's number 4. If you didn't notice, I only got to 3 before. The 4th thing is we have to learn to dream again. We have to relentlessly hold on to our vision in the midst of the boardrooms and the meetings and all of the inertia and the status quo that we exist in every single day. We have to dream again about what we can do together. And if that vision stays alive and we chase it every damn day that we are on this earth, we're going to be okay. So thank you. It is a very big honor to be with you all today, and thanks for having me. Thank you. We actually have time for we have 10 minutes of time for questions. So I guess if we want to do that, that's great. Can we actually get lights up here? I can't see anybody. If it's possible to get lights up here. Yay.
Your message is inspirational. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
A very simple question. If Bernie Sanders is the Democratic nominee, do you think your generation, the younger generation, will really help make that happen? And if he's not the Democratic nominee, will you also turn out to make something happen?
Yeah, great question. So the answer is yes and yes. Next question. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, no, this is a really important question. So Sunrise Movement ran a 6-week-long, really intensive endorsement process where we actually ranked all the candidates based on their climate plans. We educated our base and ran discussion platforms online, or forums online, and then had people vote over a week. And actually, over 80% of Sunrise members voted in favor of Bernie Sanders, so he became our official endorsed candidate for the 2020 primary cycle. And, in large part, that is because he has had the most ambitious climate platform out there. He has been a champion on this issue for decades. He has understood the intersectional fight for social justice as part of the environmental justice fight for a very long time. And he understands that it's about building a movement. It's not just about having, a political savior. And so we have been doing tons of work actually for him in Iowa and New Hampshire, and we were on college campuses in both of those states, and we're contacting tens of thousands of youth voters, particularly to drive turnout for young people, and we'll be continuing to do that in a number of states over the next 8 months. However, it is extremely clear to us that regardless of who becomes the nominee for the Democratic side, that person, on the day that they are officially recognized as the nominee for the Democratic side, we will put all of our resources into supporting them to win the presidency. And that the most important thing we need to do this year is to ensure that Congress and the next administration arrives in 2021 with a huge mandate from our generation to deliver on day one on a climate agenda. Yeah, and it's too important to be righteous about it.
So just as a follow-on to that, I've been fairly disheartened on our campus, which is in Pennsylvania, at the percent of the young people who say they're going to vote at all. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just wondering, from your movement, from the time you're spending on campus, what have been the most effective messages to convince them that this election could have an impact on the rest of their lives?
Yeah, great question. Do you want to go too, Craig, and then I can just take both of them?
Sure. And thanks for the shout out. So I know Sunrise just held, I think, your first middle school and high school youth summit explicit just for that generation. And I'm curious if you think those folks will make whether or not universities have divested part of their calculation of which universities to attend when they're at that age.
Great question. Okay. So, I think the thing with young people is talking to young people is just like talking to any other demographic of people. I think the thing that we try to do is remove young people are well aware that every other generation of people believes them to be, all of the tropes about millennials and Gen Z. We're lazy, we don't care, we're obsessed with our phones, whatever. But I have found it to be quite the opposite when I actually get down and talk to people on these campuses. I think first and foremost, what I try to do is connect with people about what they care about. And so the first question I always ask is a question. It's what do you care about? What are you concerned about right now? What matters to you? And I think the thing about the climate crisis is it touches virtually every part of our lives. And so whether people say things about health, or whether they talk about jobs in the economy, or they're worried about foreign policy and getting into another costly and unnecessary war, there's a way to kind of bring them towards the climate crisis. And then secondly, I think getting away from the emphasis on facts and figures and all of that, but actually like speaking to people from your heart and sharing personally, why do you care about the climate crisis? Or why do you care about voting in this election? Why is that an important thing to do for our generation? And then just like actually getting out there and talking to people is the biggest thing that people are like, young people don't care. And I'm like, yeah, but do you spend nearly as many resources going out and actually talking to young people as you do on certain other demographics of voters? And the answer is always no. I know as someone who is trying to raise a lot of money to talk to youth voters that there is a very small number of people who are actually investing in that. So that's what I would say there. And we also have a ton of resources on our website or that you can access. So if there are young people who are trying to do that on campus, fully recommend just getting in touch with us, and we'll give them what they need to go out and talk to people. And then, yeah, Craig, I think that is a great question. I mean, I remember when I was looking at colleges and universities in like 2010 and 2009, like the thing that I wanted more than anything was, does this campus actually care about its sustainability? Is it, I didn't know what divestment was in that moment, but I think we've had a completely, I mean, we have just seen trillions of dollars divested. We have seen movements created around this issue. I think it is, I think it's something that young people who are in our age demographic are keenly aware of and are looking to as they pick their colleges and universities, but they're like, you know, they're raising hell about this at when they're like 13, 14, 15, 16 and can't even vote yet. And so I think they're getting involved in both Sunrise and the Green New Deal effort, but they're also getting involved in divestment campaigns as soon as they enter these universities too.
Thanks. You said that we need to change the curriculum so that every student can learn how to fight climate change.
Yeah.
How can we work with Sunrise to do that?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I think we have some curriculum that we use. We run our own training programs. So if that's of interest, I would love to talk more about that and link you up with our training director. I mean, a big part of what we have to do is our education systems aren't actually set up too much to support young people to understand how they can be a part of civic society and make their voices heard. And so a lot of it is like I had to learn from external channels how to be an active advocate in my society and in politics and understand why that was a good and important thing to do. And so I think part of the curriculum is like both about like what is the climate crisis, what is happening, and how can you be a part of the fight to stop it, and also like how do we actually just support young people today to engage actively in our democracy and actually participate in our democracy as well. And so that's some of the curriculum that I'm the most interested in. That's like part of what we share. But I think like it should be required for every undergraduate that comes into a university to have to understand what the climate crisis is and what it means. I don't think I would have had that unless I searched for the climate science class that I was already an environmental science major in, and so it was possible. I think it should be, I mean, people should know what the effects, like people are coming from all kinds of different high school experiences, and they should have sort of a coordinated effort at the secondary education level. I think it should be at all levels, but to understand the science and also what the impact will be for their lives, and a real reckoning around that, because I think the timeline is approaching so quickly. So I would email team@sunrisemovement.org if you have any collaboration questions, because we would love to collaborate with you. But also, you know, there's like great organizations like ACE, which is the Alliance for Climate Education, and a couple others that are doing like education for high schoolers that have developed this kind of curriculum that I would be glad to point you towards too.
All right, I think this will be our last question. Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. I think a lot of us are asking something very similar, and, I'm going to try and nail down like nuts and bolts. So I teach climate change. I teach climate change, science, impacts, and hope, trying to do the education piece, right? We're infusing sustainability across our curriculum, talking about climate change, but my students are not becoming activists at all. Not that it's necessarily my job to get them to become activists, but I find that there's a sense of passivity that happens. So give them the information, the environmental groups, the information, tell them about the Sunrise Movement, and they're still not participating. So I'm wondering if you found that golden piece, which I think is something that others are asking, is what do you say that brings somebody to become more active and an advocate for themselves? So that agency is what we're looking for.
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. When I went from, I think there's two things. One is for you to go from understanding the issue to becoming activated and taking responsibility, you have to deeply understand your stake. And something that we do in a lot of our work is we talk about the parts per million, we talk about the science, we talk about how scary it is, but we don't actually bring it home to what their personal impact on their lives is. And the moment that I was like, oh my God, I'm making the connection between these floods that I saw my family having. And not everybody has that, but people love, people are watching the snow disappear where I live, and that is like a culture, that is a part of our identity. People are watching the seas quite literally rise in places like Virginia and in, or gentrification in Miami due to the climate crisis. And so I think the biggest thing is like, how can you what are the questions you can ask to your young people about what do you have at stake? And actually getting them to emotionally feel the crisis rather than sort of feeling it in their head. And I think when people have a transformation emotionally, that's when they start to believe that they need to take action. And then the other thing I would say is that like a lot of what stops people from taking action that I have noticed is fear, is like a fear of speaking out, is a fear of that they won't do it right, is a fear that of retaliation, a fear of it is countercultural to speak out in our society because people, like there's a culture around behaving a certain way or dressing a certain way and acting a certain way in order to kind of be a part of our culture. And so I think any action like this requires an inherent level of risk, even if it's really small. Like I remember just like shaking when I would have to facilitate a meeting of 10 people for the first time because I'd never done anything like that before. Or speaking in front of a crowd for the first time, I was like, oh my God, I'm so scared to do this. And so I would say like, as much as you can actually have conversations about like what holds us back from taking action, maybe you've already done that, but that's something. It says time's up, but I just have a couple more things. The other thing is, like, do you bring people in from other, like part of the problem is I think what happens, like, when social scientists have studied this, they've seen that there's a peak moment where everything's very exciting, like around the Green New Deal or around Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matter or any of these movements. And then if there isn't a ongoing container where people can be a part of local organizing to then that can hold them and be a container for them and a vehicle for them to continue their organizing, it quickly peters out. And so I think like something that could be really good is finding ways in which you can actually get people who are embedded in those communities to be helping like build that relational contact with people who are in your classes. But ultimately, I think like it's really hard. And like not everybody is gonna make it there. And at the same time, I think the more that you can be in collaboration with a lot of, like, I remember some of the dopest moments in the divestment campaign when I was an undergrad was collaborating with other classrooms that were science or environmentally related, and then having those folks engage with our campaign on campus, and then like a small fraction of those people got involved. But I don't think it has to be everyone either. And I'm happy to talk more about that too. And one last thing, not to just keep pulling Sunrise, but we're trying to figure this out too. Like, we're running a program where these global strikes that have been happening around the country, around the world, are really important, and we've been leaning into that big time. And the next big day is Earth Day, so if you are interested in getting plugged into that, please let us know. But we have been kind of experimenting with how do you deliver the kind of education, the grassroots organizing skills, the relational skills that young people need to go from 0 to 100 to organize these strikes in their own communities when they've never done this before and they live in, wherever they live. Like, some of these are Shreveport, Louisiana. Like, what do you do with those communities? And so we've been developing online guides, videos, tools, and supporting people to undergo like a 6-week-long process called a strike circle with 5 members of their community, where they receive education and are paired with a coach and are working and embedded in a community, and then that practice translates into providing them the skills to go out and organize in their communities after that. So it's also, I think, like, thinking about what are organizations like Sunrise or others that you could send people towards, or that, if there is, already energy and momentum happening, that you could actually support that energy and momentum rather than necessarily just your students. Yeah. Cool. That's it. Thank you.